Hey everyone, and welcome to another installment of Tom's World. This is a video I've been waiting to put out for almost 2 months now. It's going to be a video unlike any other one I've put up on my channel, as it's going to be more documentary type style. And I've been keeping it under wraps because I didn't want anybody to jump the gun and put out a history video before me, because I actually have the privilege of being the first one. You can search all you want and you'll find articles all over the place, but you're not going to find another video that goes into the history of the place that I'm about to take you. And let me show you what that place is as we see it from the road when we go past this hundreds if not thousands of times throughout the course of a year. So here we are at the very corner, or at the very crossroads of Byberry Road and Thornton Road. And you see that wall right there and the little buildings behind it? Chances are we have all driven past this so many times, for the people that live locally anyway, and never give it a thought about what it is. Well, now you're going to find out. And just as a little side note, the man that you're about to hear doing the narration for this video is a good friend of mine. His name is Otis B. Dreds, and you can find him at nightofthelivingdreds.com. That's Dreds with no A in it. And I'll put the link to that down in the description. He has his own website. He has a Facebook podcast, or a video podcast that he does every week. And he also has a YouTube channel. So I'll put links to all of that in the description. And what he does is mostly right now it's centered on the independent horror film industry, and he has some really good shows, really interesting people on when they interview people, and go watch it and see if it's your cup of tea. If you like horror movies, especially independent films, you're gonna like his podcast. Anyway, let's get in here and get into this history.
The first record of a formal school building in Byberry Township was next to the Meetinghouse in 1710 and run by the meeting. A monthly fee was required except for those in need. In 1776, one of the Friends, John Eastburn, bequeathed his estate to establish a school fund. The fund was used immediately to construct a new schoolhouse in the location. It was so successful that it quickly required an addition and was outgrown again by 1823, when the present schoolhouse was constructed. In the present schoolhouse, the first floor was a designated classroom to hold 50 students. The second floor purposely constructed as the new location for the Byberry Library. The Byberry Library was established by a group of 23 members of the meeting, including John Comley in 1794. Each member gave a small contribution for the initial purchase of more than 70 books. They and future members maintained an annual subscription. The library was initially housed in the home of a friend, but in 1798, it was moved to the schoolhouse. The stairs for the second floor library were on the exterior of the building. This space was shared when additional classroom space was needed for the girls' school between 1827 and 1837. It is unknown when the current wood frame section was constructed to house the stairs, but it was quite early. In 1870, the library held more than 2,000 volumes. It remained open to researchers until 2010, at which time most of the library records and volumes were donated to the Friends Historical Library at Swarthmore College. The schoolhouse was also used for public educational lectures for adults. After a series of lectures on astronomy proved wildly popular, John Comley suggested the creation of the Byberry Philosophical Society in 1829. In 1832, the society furthered their mission and established a cabinet of curiosities, a collection of scientific specimens. The collection is said to have once held over 2,000 specimens. The society held a weekly lecture series well into the 20th century, initially at the schoolhouse until moving to Byberry Hall in 1846. The society remained active until 1959, at which time its records and the remainder of the cabinet were placed under the care of the Byberry Friends Meeting. Specimens from the cabinet that remain are on display in the second floor of the schoolhouse, as are the remaining volumes from the library. Byberry School had a number of excellent teachers and was respected for teaching subjects such as geometry, grammar, and algebra. These were beyond the typical schooling for rural children, which was generally confined to basic writing and arithmetic. The most famous of the teachers was John Comley. He is a widely recognized figure in Quaker history not because of his teaching, but his role in the separation of 1827, the Schism. However, his role in education should not be ignored. He taught at Byberry twice, first in the 1790s. He left for 1 year to teach at the West Town School in Chester County, where he met his wife before coming back to Byberry School in 1804. Upon his return, he added Latin and Greek to the curriculum. In 1803, he authored his first educational book. Since that time, he wrote numerous books on grammar, spelling, and a reader, an advanced textbook to help students practice the lessons of other subjects. These books were revised, reprinted, and distributed around the country into the late 19th century. Original copies of the book are available in the Byberry Library. Today, the Byberry Schoolhouse continues, for over 300 years, to be a resource for equal opportunity access to high-quality childcare via a structured preschool program. The present meeting house is the third on the property. The first was constructed to the north of the burial ground in 1694. It was a small log structure that only lasted about 20 years before a stone building was constructed in 1714. Due to the quickly expanding population, the meeting house required an addition in 1753. The township continued to grow, with the majority of its residents being members of the meeting. In 1800, the township had a population of 579. In just 10 years, it grew to 765. Of these, more than half, 446, were members of the meeting. Outgrown, the old stone meeting house was demolished in 1808, and the present meeting house was constructed. Initially, meeting houses tended to be one room to hold both meeting for worship and meeting for business. The men's and women's meeting for business oversaw different subjects for the meeting, and having only one room made it difficult to separate meeting for business. Eventually, many meeting houses constructed an addition of a separate room for the women's meeting for business. However, this was felt to be unequal. After meeting for worship, the women had to leave the room to go to their space. Equality between the meeting for business began to be reflected in the meeting house form and was truly achieved in 1768 with the design of the Buckingham Meeting House. Although the size of the meeting houses would vary depending on the population of the meeting, this Buckingham form was repeated almost exclusively through 1830 and remained the prominent form through the late 19th century. This form, referred to as the double meeting house or the Buckingham model, created two chambers identical on both the interior and exterior. Although the meeting house was divided, the division wasn't intended as an element of exclusion, but two separate but equal chambers. The room is united during meeting for worship, but by closing a wooden screen in the center of the room, the men's meeting for business and the women's meeting for business could be held separately and simultaneously. The double meeting house is quintessentially American and is a representation of the Americanism of the Quaker religion, in which women are complete equals to men. The Byberry Friends Meetinghouse is a quintessential example of the double meeting house. The plan created two chambers identical on both the interior and exterior. It is a substantial meeting house of 36 foot by 66 foot. The overall appearance is unassuming and elegant in its simplicity. The only differences between the chambers at Byberry is that in the gallery of the men's side, the west side, a stair leads up to the attic, and the side doors are in different bays. On the men's side, the side door is in the center bay. On the women's side, the east, the door is in the north bay. On the women's side, this door led into an antechamber that provided access to the outside, but also directly to the outhouse without leaving the building. The men's outhouse was attached to the back of the meeting house on the north at the northwest corner, but there was no interior access. The Byberry Friends Meetinghouse remains virtually unchanged and represents the equality of American Quakers. Byberry Hall was constructed between 1846 and 1847 by Robert Purvis and Harriet Fortin Purvis. Robert Purvis was an African American who was a leading abolitionist and promoter of women's rights. He considered himself simply an advocate of human rights, black, white, male, or female. His parents abhorred slavery, and the family was deeply involved in the abolition movement. Robert and his two brothers attended the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society's Clarkson School for grammar school. The family were frequent guests at the home of abolitionist James Fortin. When Robert was 16, his father died, leaving the family a great deal of wealth. Robert spent time at Amherst Academy, but returned to Philadelphia in the mid-1820s. Using some of the wealth left by his father, as well as other resources, Robert began buying and selling real estate, parlaying the inheritance into even greater wealth. He married Harriet Fortin shortly after his return in 1832. Harriet Fortin was the daughter of James Fortin, often referred to as the wealthiest African American in Philadelphia during his life. From the earliest age, Harriet and her siblings were encouraged to participate in both suffrage and abolition activities. The Fortin and Purvis families were instrumental in establishment of some of the most influential organizations for enacting social change to both of these causes. Robert and Harriet bought a house in the center of Philadelphia and eventually had 8 children and a governess to manage them. Racial tensions in Philadelphia exploded into race riots in the late 1830s. The Purvises were regular targets of these. At least twice, the mobs went directly to the Purvises' residence, threatening to burn it down with the occupants inside. After this happened 2 nights in a row in 1842, Robert took his family and moved to the country for safety. The Purvises moved to Byberry Township. Their farm, called Harmony Hall, bordered the Meetinghouse complex both to the north and to the south. This move was by no means the end of their activities. The Purvises regularly traveled 14 miles to Philadelphia to attend abolitionist meetings and anti-slavery fairs, but more notably, Harmony Hall became a hub of abolitionist activity. It is thought as many as 1 slave a day was harbored at Harmony Hall. Between this and their previous house in the city, total people assisted on the Underground Railroad is estimated to approximately 9,000 by Robert and Harriet. Shortly after their arrival in 1846, they purchased the lot bordering the Meetinghouse property to the east and constructed Byberry Hall. Byberry Hall was also intended as a public meeting space. Until this point, abolitionist lectures were occasionally held in the Meetinghouse, including in 1844, when the Friends somewhat reluctantly let Frederick Douglass deliver a lecture there. But the Quaker Friends felt that such a contentious subject was not appropriate in the same space as meeting for worship. Byberry Hall provided a place to have open discussions about race, as well as education and social issues. It was intended from the start as a space to speak freely in community meetings, educational lectures, and debates. Purvis sold the hall to the trustees of Byberry Hall, an organization he founded with others. The trustees remained active well into the 20th century and were entwined with the meeting. He remained an active member of the trustees throughout his life in Byberry. The hall was also used for meetings of the Byberry Philosophical Society, which Purvis was a member, and the Byberry Literary Society, which started in 1858. Township elections were moved from the schoolhouse to the hall shortly after its construction. Byberry Hall was a royal center for the purposes to host abolitionists from throughout the Northeast, including, amongst others, William Lloyd Garrison, James and Lucretia Mott, and Frederick Douglass. It is likely that William Still also spoke here, as he worked closely with Purvis for the Vigilance Committee. The Purvises were also vocal believers in women's rights. They hosted Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton at their home, and likely these women also spoke in Byberry Hall. Although the Purvises were not members of the Byberry meeting, they appear to have been on good terms with the members, not just through their connections with Byberry Hall. They were known to attend meeting when Lucretia Mott spoke there. Their children went to Byberry School, which was the only integrated school in the area until the 1850s. Robert Purvis was a member of the Byberry Philosophical Society, which, although not a Quaker organization, was dominated by members of the meeting. He donated land to the meeting to extend the new burial ground in which two of his sons were buried. In 1847, Robert was hired to oversee the closure of the Freedmen's Savings Bank, a post that required him to spend a great deal of time in Washington, D.C. Harriet and her daughter moved from Byberry to a row house downtown in what is now called the Spring Garden neighborhood. Harriet died shortly afterward.
While walking through the burial grounds, looking at some of the older headstones, I saw some very familiar names. Walton, Knight, Tomlinson, Comley, and Richardson, just to name a few. Looking at these markers, I now know how a lot of the local streets and areas got their names. Inside the wall that runs parallel to Byberry Road are the oldest markers. In keeping with earlier traditions of Friends, many of the burials were not marked with headstones. However, there is a map of sorts inside the meeting house that shows the names and locations of all who were buried there.